So I hope we've waited long enough this time so that nothing is gonna get cut off. But welcome to number 4 of 7 of our Ask the Expert series. Today we're gonna talk about or answer questions around the migration to SAP S/4HANA. As always, before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. As I said, this is number 4. There's going to be 3 more after this on the 16th, 23rd, and then March 2nd. You see it on the slide here with different topics. The session today is going to be recorded. As always, you will get a link to the recording, both automatically from GoToWebinar as well as from Sean from our team. So he's going to send it out probably later today. And if you have questions during the webinar, so anything that pops into your head during the presentation as you hear Alessandro answer questions from other attendees, feel free to submit them in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So it's on the side. You might have to expand it. Click on the little arrow or triangle, and then it'll expand. You can type it in, and I'll keep an eye on those questions. Alessandro will answer them at the end. Host today, as you can see already, is going to be Alessandro. He's going to be answering the questions that we received up front. And with that said, well, one more thing important, please submit us as many questions as you can up front. Don't wait until the webinar, because we scheduled only half an hour and we want to be conscious of everyone's time. So we don't want to drag it out. So anything that you can submit up front, we can plan for and prepare the answers for up front, so we can quickly answer them during the webinar. But of course, if you have anything else, feel free to submit them. On the next slide, Alessandro is going to show again, in case you haven't done so yet or haven't seen it yet, the link where you can submit those questions. Simply select the topic, type in a question, click submit. We'll get it via email and we'll prepare accordingly for the next webinar. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Alessandro, and he's going to answer any questions regarding S4 migration that we've received from you guys up front. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alessandro Benzer. I had a couple of webinars already. Jenny was supposed to join us today. She is unfortunately buried in customer projects, so it's just going to be me today, but I hope I will be able to answer all your questions. As Michael said, we prepared a couple of slides, as we always did. Questions that were submitted, we consolidated some of them into one to answer a little bit broader. If you have anything, just feel free to type it into the questions box, and we'll take it up at the end of the webinar. As always, I have a couple of questions here. Let me just quickly talk through them. There were a couple of questions regarding the one-step migration to S/4HANA. So basically, what ERP release or ERP version is supported for a direct migration to S/4HANA with like a one-step migration. And obviously, you cannot migrate something that's super old to S/4HANA in a one-step migration. You would have to upgrade the old or the ERP first before you can migrate directly to S/4HANA. I mentioned the direct migrations here. So if you're on ERP, on ECC, on 6.0, which most of you are probably, then you can migrate directly to S/4HANA. If you're lower than that, then you would have to first upgrade to 6.0, or you go directly to S4 on like a greenfield approach, but you couldn't convert directly over if you're on a lower release than the ones mentioned here. Then there was also a lot of questions, and they came up in previous webinars as well. It's a big topic about the master data and how do I migrate master data, especially with the the new concept of the BP, the business partner concept. There's data that needs to be migrated, especially when it comes to customer vendor master data. That needs obviously it needs to be migrated, but also the approach and how the business partner approach changes the way we're maintaining master data in S/4HANA. We have to look into that. From a migration perspective to S/4HANA, what SAP offers is the S/4HANA Migration Cockpit, which is a tool included in S/4HANA as well as on-premise, as well as in the cloud. It's free of charge. There's no additional licenses to use it. Just look it up. If you just Google it, you will find it. With the Migration Cockpit, it allows you to migrate the data over to S4. So because there, data transformation needs to happen, because certain things change, the data model changes, and so we have to use the Migration Cockpit to get the data over to S4HANA. I hope that makes sense. Then there was a lot of questions around, ECC and how do I need to move to S4HANA today, or can I wait, or what's kind of like the timeline. The one thing that's for sure is that the mainstream maintenance for ECC will end in 2027. So we have a few more years to remain on ECC. But one other thing is also we should consider not just that ECC ERP is supported. It's also when it comes to new enhancements, new implementation, new stuff that SAP creates and adds value as a customer. They won't do it for ECC. So there will not be enhancement package 9. 8 is the highest there is for ERP. I don't think, personally, my honest opinion, I don't think there will ever be a EHP 9. That's not SAP strategy. Also, if you listen to SAP, the strategy is definitely cloud first. That means everything goes into S4HANA cloud, but also on-premise. Also in that regards, with S4HANA cloud and on-premise, we know there's different versions. If you're looking into the cloud version, if you're going to the public cloud version of S4HANA, the releases are quarterly. So every quarter you get a new release and you will be forced to upgrade, or it will update you automatically. You cannot hold back on upgrades. Once every quarter, SAP will release new functionality in S4HANA in the public cloud, and you as a public cloud customer, you will be upgraded automatically. If you're an on-premise customer, then those updates, they only come once a year. So we have one major release per year where SAP combines those quarterly packages kind of from the public cloud into one major release for the on-premise stack. Also, when we see last couple of months, last couple of years even, the new investments that SAP did into the ERP, everything went into S4HANA. There's very little that goes into ECC. So if you have the requirement, you're waiting for new functionality, it's very likely SAP will create and develop that stuff only for S4HANA. Again, the mainstream maintenance will end in 2027. So by then, ideally, you wanna be migrated over to S4, because after that, if you keep ECC running and you have to support it, I mean, there will be individual maintenance contracts you can do with SAP, but I just think they're very costly. So I think it's really a good opportunity to move to S4HANA in the next couple of years. Also, ERP has been around for more than 15 years. So obviously, not saying it's an outdated old tool, but it's over 15 years old, and I think it's a good time, to move to S4HANA, because there's a lot of business benefits if you do so. Then there were a couple of specific questions regarding. One was regarding developer keys. I've seen that in customer projects as well. In S4HANA, that concept of developer keys went away. So in S4HANA, when it comes to developer access, where the developer can create code, change code, it comes down to the authorizations. On ERP, it was basically that the developer needed the authorizations, the sDevelop object, but then also a developer key. So you have to register someone, a developer, in the support portal and provide a developer key to the developer so they can create and change code. In S4HANA, that developer key is not required anymore. It always comes really down to the authorizations. So that basically means for S4HANA project, if you move to S4HANA, you have to make sure that the sDevelop object is fully under control, because whoever has access to create and change based on the sDevelop object will be able to create and change code, whether they're a developer or not. If they have the authorizations, they can do so. So the developer key, very many customers use developer key to kind of safeguard code changes. That alone will not be sufficient anymore. You have to go to the sDevelop object and make sure they don't over authorize and really have it under control. Then also in regards development, especially for custom code, many of you have a lot of custom code. How does that look like in S4HANA on-premise, but also in a cloud version? If you have on-premise, then obviously the extensibility that you have is still available. So there's two different concepts in S4HANA. It's the in-app extensibility, and then what SAP calls the side-by-side extensibility through the business technology platform. So basically, the in-app extensibility, especially if you're an on-premise customer, it's just your classical ABAP development environment. You know what you've done in ERP, very similar. It will be in S/4HANA. It's an ABAP stack. Everything will still be very same. So you can still create custom code, change code, do all that stuff directly on the S/4HANA on premise. But then now also with that side-by-side extension, we can also leverage the SAP Business Technology Platform, the cloud platform basically, to extend applications. And we can extend those applications not only with ABAP, we can also use Java, we can use Node.js. There's different ways how we can extend applications. There is different environments how that can be deployed. We will go way too deep if we start that conversation. But on the Business Technology Platform, there's different environments. There's even ABAP environment. If your developers are used to code ABAP, and that's where they're the pros and the experts, then the ABAP environment will be a very great tool to enable and leverage that side-by-side extensibility to extend and enhance custom code, but also SAP code. If there's enhancement points or user exits you can leverage, then that side-by-side extensibility will allow you to do that. So from that perspective, with S/4HANA not really losing out on opportunity to customize and further develop. You have now even more. You can do what you've done in the past, but then also with that side-by-side extensibility, you can also use functionality directly out of the cloud, especially if you're connecting cloud applications and you want to do like integrated scenarios. Then the Business Technology Platform, I think, is a great foundation to do that. Then last but not least, we only had so many questions. The last question, I think this is a little bit more extensive maybe, and goes a little bit back to what we discussed in previous sessions, where we in previous webinars, not necessarily of the expert series here, but in previous webinars where we talked about S/4HANA migration approaches, what it takes from a security, roles and authorizations perspective. There was a lot of questions in that regards, what I have to do, because it looks like some of you are very early in the journey to S4, just trying to start, figure out what needs to happen. So I just quickly want to go back to, give a general understanding of what it means to move to S/4HANA from more so from a roles and authorizations perspective, from a security perspective, what you need to do and what approaches there are to get you to S/4HANA. Very important with the S/4HANA is that at the end of the day, S/4HANA is a new product, and there's different ways how we can get there. We have different approaches from brownfield, greenfield, bluefield. There's different approaches how we can get to S/4HANA. What's important is that the migration to S/4HANA is not a direct upgrade. So it's basically either we migrate or we transfer over to S4. It's not just like an enhancement package that we just implement and everything is the same. It really requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of effort from a business perspective because business processes will change, will adopt new stuff, but also from an roles and authorizations perspective, there's a few things that will change. That's basically because with S/4HANA, what SAP tries to do is a simplification, a consolidation of applications. That basically means that for a requirement, we will only have one solution and not many like we had in ERP. That ultimately leads to a reduction of applications, transaction codes, web Dympros, whatever there was, it will be reduced to just basically one solution per requirement. That ultimately plays back to the roles and authorizations because our end users, they still have to do certain tasks. Like here, I have the one example with entering a vendor invoice in ERP. To enter a vendor invoice, we can use module MM with various transactions, but we can also use module FI with other transactions. Now there's a whole list of transactions that allow us to enter vendor invoices. In S/4HANA, for example, that's consolidated into one functionality that's called invoice management. And that ultimately means that, where we have maybe, I'm just giving an example, where we might have 10 transactions in ERP, there might only be one or maybe two in S/4HANA. We have maybe a GUI transaction, and then we might also have a Fiori application that allows us to do certain tasks. So there's a reduction happening that ultimately means that we have to go back to our roles and make those changes, because the end users, our business users that entered vendor invoices in ERP, they're still entering vendor invoices in S/4HANA. Now, what changes is not what they're doing. What changes is the applications they use to do their job. And that ultimately means those applications need to be customized and configured. That's the one thing, but they also need to be authorized. And so that's basically what needs to happen. And that ultimately means that if we're moving to S/4HANA, we have to touch the roles. It's not just going to happen that we can just go and say everything will work. It will not. There's thousands of transactions that will become obsolete. New transactions that come into picture. And then we also have the component of Fiori, because the user interface with Fiori in S/4HANA becomes mandatory in many cases. And a lot of customers, decide to go entirely onto Fiori as a unique user experience for the end users. Fiori brings a lot of advantages. We had Fiori sessions already, and if you're interested, we can also share a couple of previous webinars we had around Fiori. But Fiori with S/4HANA will be mandatory. A lot of customers choose to give a lot of functionality and applications into Fiori. And it also needs to be authorized, because Fiori, at the end of the day, a Fiori app is like another transaction. It needs to be authorized. There is start authorizations that are required. We have to build the business authorizations that are required, but we also need to build Fiori content. So there's a lot of things that will change, and we need to attach or make those changes so that the end user at the end of the day can complete their work. When we look into the approaches, there's a couple of different approaches that we like to or I like to talk about. So first of all, depending on where you are and kind of like what's the goal, and we can here maybe start on the left to kind of talk through it. I mean, depending on customers, most of you guys obviously are existing SAP customers, so you would start out down here. But then there's also a lot of customers that move to S/4HANA for, especially into the cloud, that come from maybe Oracle or from other ERP solutions, and they want to have, the advantage or want to use S/4HANA. So for you, I think for most of you guys, it's probably you're an existing customer, you have an ERP running, and you have to sooner or later migrate to S4. With that, basically, you're starting out down here, and then we typically see three different approaches to get you to S/4HANA. It can be a greenfield implementation where we basically step up a new system, and then you just migrate the data, for example, over to that new system. So then this is really a greenfield approach. You leave a lot of things behind, and you start on a green field. That's why the approach is called greenfield. That has pros and cons, as any approach has. The big pro for a greenfield approach is really you can leave stuff behind. If you have an ERP and you had it for 20+ years, and there's a lot of stuff in there you don't need anymore, a lot of customization, a lot of custom code, all of the sort that makes it so hard to upgrade and all that stuff, you can leave that behind and really start fresh. Then a lot of customers, they also choose to do a system consolidation, which is kind of like a blue field where you have multiple ERP systems, and now you're consolidating everything into one S4 box. So that's especially for customers that acquired companies over the years that are, or just by the nature had multiple ERPs, and you want to consolidate, and you do that as part of the S4 migration. Then we talk about the blue field. Or then the brown field, which is basically the system conversion approach, where you take your ERP and you convert it to an S4 box, and and then have an S4. The big disadvantage, and because at first the brown field seems the obvious choice, you have everything already configured, and the configuration will be converted over to S4. That seems to be like an obvious approach. It's not always, because the pro that we had with the green field was leaving stuff behind. That's kind of like the con on the brown field. So whatever you had, you're taking it with you. So that can be good or can be bad. Different approaches, again, depends where you are, and every customer is a little bit different, but those are the three approaches when it comes to moving to S4. In either scenario, whether you do green field, blue field, or brown field, you have to touch your authorizations. and sorry, these are for whatever reason in German, so it looks like we didn't do a good job here in translating. A lot of you guys speak German, so you will be okay. But ultimately, regardless of what approach you take to migrate to S4HANA, you still have to touch the authorizations. And ultimately, depending on what you do, you can do a redesign of the authorization concept. That's what a lot of customers decide to do. They say, hey, for the past 20 years, not only was our box a little bit out of shape, also our security concept, our authorization concept wasn't perfect. A lot of issues. We had a lot of over authorizations, cross-pollination of access, and the entire concept grew over the years, but we never really had a proper concept. So let's start fresh. Let's do it all over, and then we do a redesign. This could be one way. Others, they say, we have a decent design. It seems to be working. It worked very well. We didn't have audit findings from maintainability and maintenance perspective. It's all working fine. So let's just migrate it. But even that migration, if you're happy with what we have today, and we migrate to S4HANA, because of all those consolidations, because a lot of functionality will change, because there's a new data model, we still have to touch it. Obviously, there's different efforts here than there is here. Redesign is always more effort than just a migration where we just basically take what we have and we migrate it. That's always easier, but regardless, we have to migrate it over. What we do at Exciting, we kind of because everyone is using different colors, so we have our red field approach, where we basically in either scenario, whether you go greenfield or brownfield and do a migration or a redesign, we will always evaluate whatever you have in the past and try to make that consolidate all that and make it work for S4HANA. Because even if you say, I do a greenfield and my authorization concept was bad, I want to redesign that and I start from scratch, we will still have information available from ERP, from the legacy box, that we can take over into the new design. For example, business processes, our end users. A purchaser will still be a purchaser in S4HANA. They will still do very similar tasks than they did in ERP. Now, what will change? Again, the transaction codes, maybe Fiori. That's what will change. So we have to look into the new processes, how do those business processes work, how they are designed, and then based on that, we can build the authorizations. But a lot of information we can still take from the old system when it comes to, like, for example, organizational values, stuff like that can still be taken and put into a design that also is completely newly created for S4HANA. And here, obviously, the entire, especially if you're one of our customers that use the Exciting Authorizations Management Suite, the XMS, to automate a lot of those tasks, to get all the time savers for a redesign, then obviously all that information is already known to you, and we can import all that information and process it to get a very a customer specific role design. Whether we use templates or we start from a greenfield, at the end of the day, you will have S4HANA roles. In the brownfield approach, when we just do a conversion and we migrate, there's different ways how it can be done. Some customers decide to do it more like quick and dirty, where we say we just want to go live in S4HANA. Let's just take what we have, we make it work. Maybe it's because the design back here is so bad, but we don't have time for a redesign. So we just do a migration and we just do a conversion or a technical conversion of the roles. Yes, we know they're not great. Yes, we know they will not be better than S4HANA, but we just want to go live. And then after go live, we do a redesign. Then we don't want to spend too much time in a migration from a roles and authorizations perspective, because we will do it down the line. So there's different ways even there how we can make it work. We can do it perfect, do a redesign, new implementation. We can do if you have a good design, we make it we keep it the way it is. Or if it's bad and you want to keep it bad, then we just move that over to S4, do all the necessary conversions and make it work. Regardless of where you are and where you want to go, you have to touch the roles and authorizations. Unless you're a customer that uses SAP all for your end users, you will have to touch those authorizations, because transactions will change. There's like 5,000 T codes that will go away, that need to be replaced. Fiori will come into picture. You don't have very often Fiori today in ERP, but that will become into the picture in S4, that needs to be authorized. We need to include it into our authorization design, and therefore we have to touch the roles. Regardless what you do, we have to touch it. I hope that makes sense. That's kind of like what I have prepared from a questions perspective. Michael, do we have any questions other than the ones?
No, I don't see anything in the Q&A box. So apparently you covered everything the audience wanted to know.
Fair enough. Or maybe they already watched all the previous webinars about S4HANA, maybe all the questions.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's no more questions, then I would just say thank you very much. If there's anything that comes up after the session, just drop us an email. Always happy to help. Here's my details. If you wanna get in touch with me directly, just shoot me an email over. I'll try to answer them. And yeah, if there's nothing else, then I would say thank you very much, and we're looking forward to seeing you all next week in the next session. Next week is SAP HANA, so HANA as a database. Eric and Volker will be talking about that. They're the pros when it comes to the database. Any questions you might have, feel free to submit them up front, or then just join the session and ask them live during the webinar.
All right, thank you very much, Alessandro. Thanks to the audience for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you next week again.